You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey everybody, it's lovely to have you back with me on the podcast. You are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I'm your current host, Steve Adams, or the aforementioned Mighty Blue. I say current host because, as I told you recently, I'm taking a little bit of time away from the weekly show and concentrating on something else for the summer. Yet I'll still be on every week as I follow our intrepid featured hiker, Katie Westling, or Phoenix, as she heads north. I will also be hosting one of my shows every month. The rest of the time, Ryan Hopkins, or JR, will be hosting the show and bringing his unique slant with him. We're going to chat about his plans next week, so watch out for that. Our main guest this week is Ray Kroebl, or Sparky. And I realised during my interview with Ray, I featured quite a few of the class of 2019 members, and subconsciously, I guess I'm drawn to them. I suppose we're linked and kindred spirits. We shared that 2,200-mile path for 6 months, and even though some of us never met, our lives were intertwined. As you're going to hear from Ray, he had the time of his life. He's going to be on in a moment. After Ray, our ATC chat is with Brendan Mysliwiec, or at least I think that's how you say it. As you'll hear, I totally botch it when I introduce him, but he was very gracious about it. Brendan lives in Washington and is effectively ATC's lobbyist. He's a fascinating bloke, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of his appearance on the show. After Brendan, we hear from Katie Westling, or Phoenix, as she shares with us her first thoughts, actually out on the trail. Katie started on Monday morning, and we spoke on Wednesday, so it's a pretty fresh update. And finally, Larry Luxembourg's Walking the Appalachian Trail talks about the cult of Ed Garvey. Very interesting. So now, let's hear from a man whose first language isn't English, but it's certainly hiking. Here's Ray Kroebl, or Sparky. So, we're going to go abroad today for this week's interview. In fact, we're going to Switzerland. This is Ray Kroebl. Hey Ray, how are you? How did you actually say your last name?
Kroebl,
right?
Yeah.
And I did pretty good then. Okay. So Ray, funny enough, I was having my normal morning sort of hit on Facebook this morning, and saw that you'd commented on a post about good advice that you received about hiking, and yours really resonated with me. So why not share it with everybody? Do you remember what you said when somebody asked for good advice this morning?
The best advice is probably to be aware of the fact that you're not going to come back the same person.
That is true, and we will talk about that.
That you went on the trail.
But that wasn't what you said this morning. There's something that made me laugh when I read it. You said make sure you get an anti-slip mat under your sleeping bag.
That was a technical. Yeah, sure, that was a technical tip. The anti-slip mat from IKEA or wherever is one of the best things you can take along, really.
Why is that? I know why, but
because there will be numerous times when you don't get a really flat camp space to put your tent. So your sleeping pad will be slipping around inside your tent if you're tenting. With one of these no-slip mat things, you're safe.
I'm going to go and get one of those today. I tell you what, I slipped around in my tent all the bloody time. Right. Both times. So I've been on the trail for, I guess, 1 year because I've done it twice. So I've probably spent 280 nights in the woods slipping around on my mat. Right. I don't know why. I never resolved that.
And you hate that, and it makes for bad sleep.
It certainly does. Yeah. And so before we get into your hike itself, what other things did you learn or did you take to the trail that you would advise other people?
Well, certainly the standard advice, take it easy in the beginning.
Definitely.
Don't rush. Take it easy, take it easy, take it easy. That's so important.
Yeah.
I didn't come untrained, I was in pretty good shape, and I've been hiking all of my life. But I've met people who, in the early days on trail where I just saw them and I thought that's not going to be good. They were overdoing it.
Yes, that's not going to end well.
I think many or most of these people, these guys and girls, dropped out early because they got hurt. They got problems with their feet or knees or whatever. They fell down there.
And it often is because they've gone out too fast to start with. So I think that is one of the great bits of advice as well. And so now we've dispensed the free advice, we can move on. Now, you're in Switzerland, and I've been there and I've skied in Switzerland several times, and you're surrounded by some truly beautiful mountains. You've already mentioned you've been a hiker. What is your relationship with the outdoors? How would you define that, and mountains in particular?
My relation to the outdoors started with the Boy Scouts, I guess, when I was a kid.
Sure.
Then I have been hiking a lot, doing, cross-country hikes here in Switzerland, stuff like that. Then I moved out of the country. I have lived in Japan for a number of years.
Oh, really?
And, job and career, and then I got married and kids and so on.
Yes.
Then I had to calm down a little bit on the hiking side. But when I got back to Switzerland, I started to do much more again. And then maybe the last 10 years or so, I started to go crazy and did things that I wouldn't never do again.
Like what?
I'm too old now. When you're 50 and you're in good shape, you can do a lot of things. But when you're past 60 and you look at the photos and the videos that you took, you just look at it and say, Jesus, I'm never going to do this again. How could I do that? Some relatively risky, dangerous mountain climbs.
Here. Oh, you actually were a mountain climber, were you?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my gosh, no. Yes. I don't know how anybody does that. That is truly crazy. So before you actually came to the US to do the AT, how much backpacking and overnight hikes did you actually get in? Did you go for long journeys before, or was this a real departure for you?
No, I was. Sounds a bit strange if I say that myself, but I was very well prepared.
Oh, right. Okay.
On the information side, on the one hand, and also physically. I did at least 6 or 7 hikes here in Switzerland for, lasting for 6 days, 7 days, 8 days, something like that. Tuning in my gear, I always had the full projected AT gear with me, although I wouldn't necessarily have needed it.
Sure.
Just to carry around the stuff, and so I changed out a number of items too. Got a different backpack and this and that, a different tent.
So you were well prepared then, man.
I was very well prepared, and I think that was a big bonus.
Right. Now, I know you've spent a lot of time mountaineering and hiking in Switzerland, but so I suppose the question is, why the AT? And then you told me how you learned about it. Tell us the story about a family road trip. Yeah, a family road trip. Tell us about that.
Exactly, yeah. I was on a road trip in the US, in the southern part of the US, about 28 years ago, I think it is.
All right.
And we were driving. We had little kids at that time. Sure. We were driving from Cherokee to Gatlinburg.
Sure.
And that's Newfound Gap that you go over. And then at the top at Newfound Gap, where this big parking lot is, the kids needed to pee.
So they
went to pee. I stood next to my car, smoked a cigarette, and, waited. And then there was these 3 guys coming out of the woods, hikers. They looked ugly. This is a long time ago. They were these. They had these huge Kelty packs, these frame packs there.
Sure.
They came up to me and bumped me for cigarettes. I gave them cigarettes, and we started talking. And I asked them, "What are you doing?" And then they told me they're walking the whole Appalachian Trail. Right. That's the first time I even heard of the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
So they told me, well, it's a trail that goes all the way from Georgia, Maine, and so on. And at that very moment, I decided one fine day I'm going to do that.
So what did your wife think about that? Did you tell your wife?
Let's put it this way. She was not my wife anymore at the time I finally did it.
Oh, right.
But I had a lot of support from my family, from my kids who are all adults and
Yes. So you took quite a while to get round to it, obviously, because family, work and kids and so on. That often happens to a lot of people. Was it always there, still in the background as a genuine retirement goal? You knew you were planning towards the AT?
I wouldn't call it a retirement goal, really.
All right.
Let's put it this way. The AT made me retire. I still had a big job, and
we're actually going to come back to that in a minute. I know you sort of did retire. So how were you able to take the time then to go there in that case? Were you actually working?
I was working. I had a good job. I took 7 months unpaid leave. Right. Which was okay with my employer. And the plan was that I would go back to work again when I come back. Yeah. So I had a good support from my employer at that time, from my boss.
We're going to tell everybody in a minute how you treated your boss when you got back, but we'll come to that bit later. So really, you made the decision. I suppose your kids were off your hands, then you were ready to go. What did your family think about you doing something like this? So were they quite comfortable that you knew enough to get it done?
Oh yes, I'm sure. They were totally supportive. They knew that I can do something like that.
Right.
Unless, of course, some accident or something happens.
Sure,
but,
of course,
they knew, of course, that I'm or have been out in the woods here in Switzerland for a long time. So, there was nothing but support. We stayed in touch. Over the time, I had one of these Garmin InReach mini things, where they could track me over the internet, and they were fine.
And I know that you got into some YouTube videos to prepare more for it. Are there different logistics to think about for a non-US citizen coming over to the States and staying for 6 months, or you just come on a visitor's visa, or did you try to get an extension in case it took you longer than 6 months?
Yeah. I can only talk for the Swiss, but I assume it's the same for the British or whoever.
Sure.
You need a 6 months visa, and that's all you can get.
Right.
And it's quite a complicated process. You have to go to the U.S. Embassy and fill out forms and things and that. And you get 6 months. And that's, as you know, narrow for an AT, especially for people my age.
Our age, you're darn right. Yeah, you're right.
6 months is kind of narrow.
Yes.
And there's no way that you can get a visa longer than 6 months. I've met many other Europeans on the trail.
So when you spoke to immigration then, did you talk to them about the possibility you might be a few days late, or they said that you're in for 6 months, you've got to leave at a certain date?
What I did. It was a fairly humiliating process. That's what they suggested me to do at the U.S. Embassy here in Switzerland, in Bern. They said, well, just go there and talk to these people and show them papers that you got insurance, that you got money, that you have a job, and so on. So I took along a whole bunch of paper there.
Sure.
And the first guy who checked my passport and everything, he said, no way. It's 6 months.
They are charming, aren't they? When you go into the country, they're not charming. So, and I know you started I started February the 26th, and you started, I think, the 4 days earlier on the 22nd. Is that right?
22nd in Amicalola, right? 23rd.
Right. So in that case, did you fly into Atlanta the day before?
Yes. No, actually 2 days before.
Okay. So you started on the 22nd, so you flew in on the 20th, landed on the 20th, and I know that you finished 5 days before me as well. So you stayed just 4 or 5 days ahead of me the whole time. You finished on the 18th of August. So you only had another 2 days to get back out to Atlanta, didn't you?
No, because I did. After much pleading and humiliating process, I did get an extension to 7 months.
Oh, right. I didn't know you could do that. Oh, that was great.
Yeah. Although I don't know how it worked. Finally, I don't know, the third or fourth guy I had to deal with there. You know, they took me from one counter to the other.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
He just took a ballpoint pen, crossed out the date in my passport that was stamped in my passport, crossed it out and wrote a different date, 19th of September, so one more month.
That is something for people to know, by the way, because you're right. At our age, 6 months is quite a relatively tall order. So I think that was great. And so as we were on the trail in pretty much the same areas, probably 30, 40, 50 miles apart, probably most of the time, many of our experiences, or at least with the weather, must have been quite similar. What was the trail how you imagined it would be, or was it different as far as you're concerned?
It was different. The first, I don't know, 4 or 5 days,
sure,
let's say to Neil's Gap or something, that was fun.
Yes.
Well, it was raining all the time, but it was fun.
Yes.
And much later on the trail, there were some areas where I thought they're pretty tough.
Yes, oh, definitely. There's New Hampshire, Maine, a lot of Pennsylvania. I don't think anywhere on the trail is that easy. I just think it's quite. And I suppose the reason behind the question was you are surrounded by incredible scenery and beauty and nature in Switzerland. Did you find the trail to be beautiful as well?
Oh yes. I thought it was from that point of view, it was a totally inspiring experience. It was wonderful out there. Even when it was raining or we had snow and I don't know what, it was just great to be out there in nature, and the views were spectacular. And of course, I have a favorite state.
Oh, go on then. What's your favourite state?
Maine.
Oh, same with me. Oh,
By far.
That's going to be one. That's going to be one of the questions at the end. But yes, I would go with that as well.
Maine is out of this world. It's so beautiful out there.
Yeah, really.
And we were lucky that, or I was lucky that we had very good weather when we went through Maine in summer. That's right. Like so you do.
Yes, I've thought about this stuff because when I went first in 2014, I went at the end of March, so I ended up in Maine in September. And even though we had pretty decent weather, it was getting cold by then. Mm-hmm. But to go through New Hampshire and Maine in the summer, I thought was a real treat, and I thoroughly enjoyed it myself.
Totally.
Did you get any injuries along the way?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, go on then. What did you get?
I started with the tradition of counting my face plants.
All right, yeah.
And I don't mean little slips. I mean, you really, falling over. And I ended up with 19 for the whole trail.
By the way, I had 46 first time, 43 second time.
Whoa. Whoa, that's heavy. I recorded one... a dislocated pinky.
All right. Nice.
One concussion.
Oh, wow. How'd you get that?
Well, just fell off the trail somewhere, hit my head on a rock.
Oh, wow. You were lucky then,
walked around
really.
like a zombie for
my gosh.
I don't know how long.
Wow.
Until I met my good friend Doc, who is a veterinarian. And he knows his medicine. He looked at me and said, Jesus, you're concussed. Because they can tell about the pupils in your eyes. They can tell if you're concussed or not.
Okay.
But that was okay. And then I had some ankle injuries in New York. You remember those rocks when you get in from New Jersey into New York?
Yes.
These big rocks, you have to climb some ladders there.
They were smooth and almost, they were upturned boats almost, weren't they?
Exactly. They're big like houses almost.
Yes.
And it was raining like crazy and it was so slippery and I fell off one of those.
Easily
done.
I
had some ankle injuries. I had to stop for like 4 days in Suffern in New York.
So did any of those injuries give you any pause and make you doubt that you might finish, or were you always...
No.
That is the answer. You just wanted to carry on.
Never, ever had a doubt that I wouldn't finish. I was totally sure.
That's cool. You can't be the confidence of the Swiss, can you?
Yeah. No, really. I never had any doubts. I had never had many problems, really.
Wow.
Just now looking at the hikers, on YouTube that are now on the trail, they have hard conditions.
Yes, I've seen.
Very cold and so on.
Yeah.
For example, I don't remember ever having felt cold.
Really?
No.
Oh my gosh. You must have had very good gear then. I was cold. I remember being cold on Tray Mountain. That is a cold mountain, both my hikes. And I will always remember Tray Mountain as the coldest place to be.
Yeah?
Each time, yeah. And for me, 2019 was a year of very, very few animal encounters. I just saw one bear in Shenandoah. And I know you actually... You had a bit of a bear encounter, didn't you? Quite neat.
We had. I had a funny bear encounter. I was walking with Greg, a guy, a section hiker, long section hiker, who I met many times, and we had lunch somewhere in Shenandoah National Park, and then he wanted to go on. I was not finished with my lunch, so he went off. And later on, I followed, and then all of a sudden he comes running up the mountain here towards me and says, "Jesus, there's a bear sitting right on the trail. We can't get around it because it was totally overgrown there."
Yes.
So I said, "Okay, let's go and have a look." And so we slowly approached, and there was a bear mama with her 2 cubs. The cubs were playing, trying to learn how to climb trees.
Yes.
And Mama was sitting right in the middle of the trail, and there was no way around it. So we just stood there, we took video, we took photos, and waited and waited and waited. And after maybe, I don't know, half an hour or so, I got impatient. So I started clacking my trekking poles together, to get her attention. And then she looked at us, and then she slowly got up and assembled her 2 cubs and went off into the woods. Yeah.
That's a magical encounter, though, isn't it? Just to see them there, and I remember going through the zoo in New York, seeing the black bears there in the cage. They were so lethargic, and they're all matted and brown, and they looked unhealthy. Yet the bears we saw looked active, didn't they? Tons of vitality.
Right. I didn't go through that zoo in right there on the Hudson River.
All right.
Because I arrived much too late. That was one of the days I screwed up completely schedule-wise. It was a wonderful day, and I somehow got lost track of my timing and everything. So I arrived down there like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, everything closed. So you have to go around the zoo. There's a Blue Blaze trail around the zoo because the zoo is closed. Yeah. And then up the hill. And then I tried to find a place to put my tent, which was not easy.
No, I remember that climb as well. I remember that climb. We would have had an angled place to camp there, I tell you.
Oh, right. That was really bad. The bad thing about it was that I don't know what kind of animal it was. While I was setting up camp, it bit into my mattress.
Oh, blimey.
So I had holes in my mattress, and I had at least 3 weeks of hassle trying to get that fixed before I then finally had to buy another one somewhere.
Yeah, are you somebody who likes to hike by yourself, Ray, or did you get involved in the trail family? Because you did mention somebody you met, Doc, was it? Yeah, you met Doc, didn't you? Did you enjoy being by yourself? Because I know you spent quite a bit of the time on the trail by yourself, didn't you?
Yes, I spent basically most of the time by myself. Uh-huh. Met a lot of people, one guy or one girl for a few days. We were together. We were a great crowd, like I mentioned earlier. We were together with Johns, with Easy, with Jukebox, and so on, all that crowd. Right. But this pulls apart and comes together again and so on. It was not really like a family in that sense.
But what was your, funny enough, what was your trail name? You didn't mention it.
Sparky.
Sparky. Okay, right. I should remember that actually. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, these trail names, that person becomes that name, don't they? Don't you think so?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're known as Sparky.
I got mine in a because of a strange accident that had happened.
Go on then, tell us.
Early. I think it must have been maybe a week or so into the trail. It was very cold, as you remember.
Yes.
We were camping near a shelter. I forgot the name of the shelter. I had all my electronic gear in my sleeping bag, as one should.
Of course.
And I had a sleeping bag liner because it was so cold, and I was wearing compression socks made in China. cheapo. I thought, well, and somehow this combination produced a lot of static electricity. So sometime middle of the night, like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I started to have lightning in my sleeping bag. There were just sparks flying. So I obviously crawled out and got out of my tent, and others nearby tents, people in nearby tents, they saw that too. And I had a CPAX duplex light blue tent.
Right.
The color, and then that looks like lightning, and there was just hell going in there. And
that's going to make you give you the name, yeah.
Okay, and the end of the story was that all my electronics were okay. They were discharged, but my phone was good, my battery pack was okay, everything was good. But there were many tiny holes in my sleeping bag.
Wow.
And then over the next couple of weeks or so, a lot of feathers came out, down feathers came out. So I had to replace this bag. But the next morning then there was this guy came up to me and said, "Hey, we're going to call you Sparky now."
That's a well-earned name. Now, you kind of touched on this earlier on. You had a job when you went away, and your employer very decently gave you 7 months unpaid leave. But many of us have a true transitional experience on the trail. But you told me when we spoke earlier that the AT completely changed your life. So tell us what happened and what you then did when you got back.
Was maybe 4 months into the trail or so.
Sure.
When as you know, you got a lot of time to think. when you're out there.
Of course, yeah.
And I started to think about my future, and I really had the time of my life on the trail, and I felt so good being out all the time, living on a different life schedule, if you want.
Sure.
And then I told myself, no, I can't go back to work. I can't. And I did come back. I did, of course, show up for my first day at work. I went to my boss and said, boss, can't do it anymore. I just can't do it anymore. I don't want to go on the 7:04 train every morning, for 5 days a week and so on. I can't.
Wow.
And he was very generous, accepted that. Now, I would have had 3 months' notice. And then he just came up to me and said, come on, let's forget it. Then
So you went home
immediately. So I went to work for one more day after the AT, and that was it. And since then, I'm retired.
Yeah. So what do you do now? Any other Triple Crown hikes in your future, or any other long distance hikes?
I was hoping to do the PCT in 21 or this year.
Yeah.
Well, that's down the drain, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm still thinking about either the PCT or the CDT in 22.
Right. Okay. Good for you. Good for
just
you. You
look
took
how
that.
things develop,
Good for you. You made that decision. It's not an easy decision to make, but it was a good time for you to do it. And it's lovely that the trail provided that catalyst for you to do it as well, I think.
Right.
Now I'd like to finish this with these questions, these yes or no, or one quick straight answer questions, as I've been doing recently. So the first one is tent, hammock, or shelter?
Tent.
Okay. Now, I know the answer to the second one. You've already said this. New Hampshire or Maine?
Maine.
Yeah, of course. What was your favourite day on the trail?
I think it must have been the starting day.
Oh, really?
The approach trail.
Right. Really?
Yeah, although it was raining and it was awful and it was hard and everything.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, yeah. And we're not talking about Katahdin. That was out of this world.
Of course. Yeah. And what was your least favourite day then? By the logic you just given me your favourite day, your least favourite day was your Katahdin day, but I'm sure that's not true.
No. No, I wouldn't say that.
No, I know.
No. I don't really remember a least favorite day.
Wow. Well, you know what? That's a wonderful.
I just had the time of a life out there. Maybe, when I fell off that rock in New York or something like that wasn't really fun, but
I'm sure. Yeah. What about the best view that you saw out there, do you think? The best
I think it was the views again in Maine. Also in New Hampshire, of course, in the White Mountains.
Yes, yeah.
These were wonderful, really. Yeah. And what I very much liked was, again, Maine, walking along these lakes there,
It's amazing, isn't it? I'm afraid you can show as many pictures to as many people as you like. Until they actually experience it, it is just not the same at all. I've got some great pictures of those lakes, and yet you cannot bring to... it comes to my mind being there, and that is you just can't top that. Mm-hmm. What about your best hostel on the trail?
Oh, many good ones. Oh, yeah. Boots Off was great.
That was fun. Okay, good choice. Your favourite meal on the trail?
My breakfast, home self-made breakfast.
All right.
Out of a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag, of course.
Of course,
yeah. It was just granola and milk powder and dried fruit.
Nice.
And when I got to Maine, I used to collect blueberries along the trail.
Beautiful.
And stuffed that in there, and these breakfasts were great.
Oh. And what about a meal that you will never want to eat again as long as you live?
Tortillas with tuna.
Another good choice. Shoes or boots?
Shoes, trail runners.
Right. I've still never tried those. Did you filter all of your water?
Always.
Right.
Even if the water looked perfect, I would always filter. I have never not filtered.
And the last one is, did you ever deliberately sleep with your food bag as opposed to hanging or storing it?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've always been hanging, which is it's not much of a chore, you know. And
no, it's not that well, actually, I found it quite exhausting sometimes if I couldn't find a decent branch to hang.
Well, sometimes it's difficult to find the right branch. That's true. But still, no, I was very, very conscious about that. And always hung up my food.
Okay, mate. Well, look, it's been lovely to talk to you. Even though we hiked 4 or 5 days apart, I feel like we're kindred spirits because we both shared the class of 2019. So I appreciate you coming on the show and telling us about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take it easy.
Take it easy too.
Bye. It's one of those amazing things, really. You hike for 6 months, you're a few days apart, and you never meet. I think I would have enjoyed meeting Ray on the trail, and you'll see in the show notes that in one of his pictures, you can see my friend, who I did hike a lot with, Cushy Life. And I loved Ray's confidence in his ability to do this hike and his clarity that he was going to finish. And he did. Great stuff. Now, let's meet, I'll try again, Brendan Mysliwiec. I don't know. From the ATC. Sorry, Brendan. I should really have checked, by the way, but the pronunciation of this guy, I'm going to try it out without any help. This is Brendan Mysliwiec.
My last name is Mysliwiec.
Absolutely nowhere near it.
It's a different language.
Yeah, Brendan Mysliwiec. Okay, hi Brendan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm glad you're speaking English anyway, not a foreign language. You're the Director of Federal Policy and Regulation, which means that you run the advocacy and federal government relations for ATC. Does the approach that you take, and this is a pretty good time to ask you actually, does the approach you take for this sort of work change when an administration changes?
Yes.
In what regard?
So I think that it's helpful to start off with a very shorthand distinction between activism and advocacy.
Sure.
And activism is when you care about something and you want other people to care about what you care about.
Okay.
And advocacy is when you care about something and you want to explain to someone else how they already care about that thing. So different decision makers have different motivations for making decisions and different processes and criteria that they weigh in making a decision. And so when the administration changes or when the control of a chamber of Congress changes, it changes both the desired outcomes that a lot of the process is hoped to deliver, and it changes the things that people think about when they make decisions. So the change in administration from the Trump administration to the Biden administration means that everyone who is in charge of making the big picture decisions is a different person now. They're political appointees. They go through a different selection process to get that job. And as you can see, just for example, with the executive orders that President Biden has issued about things in our wheelhouse, the conservation space, it is essentially a complete departure from how the Trump administration thought about things and what the Trump administration wanted to do. So when we would advocate to the Trump administration for things, we'd have to say, well, President Trump has said he wants this and he wants his administration to do this. And so we have to explain why what we want is actually within that category of things that he wants. And now President Biden, different person, different process, different, decision makers.
So in many ways, it's the same job, but a different perspective, I presume, or at least you're dealing with people with a different perspective, aren't you?
Yes. Our objectives don't really change. What we would like, we want to make volunteering safe, fun, easy to do. We want protection for the trail's natural, cultural, recreational, experiential resources. It's just that what the people we're speaking to may latch onto different aspects of our work. And so we talk more about those things and how what we would like to do is in line with what they would like to do.
How interesting that is. That must be a real tactical or strategic planning session that takes a long time to get through. So how engaged is the government over the Appalachian Trail? Because you are a single issue advocacy group.
I would disagree, but go on.
Oh, okay. But it's the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and I thought it was all about preserving the Appalachian Trail. So isn't the single issue the Appalachian Trail?
It depends on what you define the Appalachian Trail as.
Okay.
So there are some people who think that the Appalachian Trail is the footpath and it's about hiking, that the focus of our organization is about hiking. And that's not accurate. If you read the National Trail System Act, if you read an Appalachian Trail, the Benton Mackay article, that's not what that article is about either. So the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is a conservation organization that manages a national trail. And I would say almost all. I don't want to say all. I'm the kind of person who doesn't like saying this is my favorite whatever. This is the only thing. Always and never are two words you should always remember never to use.
Very good.
But the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is a conservation organization that has its work grounded in its management of a national scenic trail. But that includes all kinds of things. That includes making sure that the treadway is taken care of. It includes making sure that volunteers are at the center of our management and maintenance structure. It includes making sure that land is acquired so that as I said a moment ago, the recreational, experiential, the natural resources of the trail are not compromised. It includes getting new people onto the trail to recreate and volunteer on the trail, to participate in our management structure. So the Appalachian Trail, if you think about it in terms of the footpath, then no, that's not how we think about the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail, and something that I explain, I also talk a lot. My whole life is sort of stream of consciousness. So if I ever get muddled, just sort of stop me. But
don't worry, I'll be muddled as well if you're muddled. Trust me.
I often explain to people, and I worked at another conservation organization before I worked at ATC. I worked on the Hill before that, and my experience with the National Trail System is it's fundamentally different than lots of other things that go on in the public land system and in outdoor recreation and in conservation. But the way that I describe it, and you've spoken to so many people who work for ATC that I'm sure that you have some kind of experience like this, is the AT is sort of a collective hallucination that it is a place. It is like a real actual place that you can go. But people dream about it and think about it. And everyone has their own little take on it. And they all sort of plug into this collective consciousness. And sometimes we have arguments about what our collective hallucination is. And it's not, I think, terribly helpful. So the idea that the only thing that the ATC really cares about is the Appalachian Trail, that's both true and misleading. Because the Appalachian Trail is like a thing that you can go look at and a thing that you can stand and look out from. But it's also an idea. It's also, it is, I think collective hallucination is, I apologize to people who experience hallucinations, but it's the best thing that I can get to explain what it's like.
I got to tell you, I'm really enjoying this series with the ATC because they keep telling me off for using the wrong expressions. It's amazing.
I'm not telling you off.
You're not. I know you're not. I know. So tell me do you go to Washington, or you probably don't these days, do you? You probably
I live in Washington. I'm in Washington.
Okay. So do you see people these days? I don't know how meetings are conducted with your sort of work, or is it all done on a screen these days?
We don't meet in person anymore. You can't get into, unless of course you're staging an insurrection, you can't get onto the Capitol campus inside the buildings unless you have a meeting that the office has decided is important enough to meet in person rather than to meet virtually.
That's interesting. I'm just kind of wondering what the power of negotiating or advocating, not negotiating, advocating with a person is, unless you can impose yourself as a character, an individual on them face to face, because Zoom doesn't do it to me. I can't see how the power of that necessarily, unless people have adapted to how they have meetings these days and these things work well for people.
I think that I kind of agree and disagree, I think, with your thinking that it is different to be virtual than to be in person.
Sure.
And I think that most people don't want to stay virtual when we are vaccinated and it's safe for us to be in close proximity together again.
Sure.
I think everyone prefers being in person. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of, personal and community safety to not be in person.
Sure.
So, and I've been asked this question because, up and coming professionals or, interns, they would like to know my perspective on this. I think that if you were beginning your career or you were trying to initiate and build relationships now, it would be more difficult. And I have pre-existing relationships, both as a lobbyist and as the ATC. We have pre-existing relationships with offices. And those relationships have changed in that we don't sort of have the casual conversations that we used to have more regularly Like you don't run into people in the hallway. You're not getting coffee with people and checking in and see how they're doing and what they're working on. And it is slightly more transactional, I think, but I think also transactional is kind of the wrong word, because when you work on these issues, my experience is you have a tendency to care about these issues, whether you're on my side of the table or their side of the table.
Yeah, I understand.
So, and that's something else is, when you lobby, I think it's true for professionals as well as for individuals or activists who are, more grassroots people who operate more in their communities than in Washington. There's usually an interest and a desire. It's just there are so many hours in the day and there are so many demands on the time of people in congressional offices and
of course.
In the administration that having to structure things more tightly because of the world that we're living in right now is challenging, but I don't think that it prevents the same kind of substantive and appreciated exchanges that we had, a year and a half ago or almost a year ago to the day.
And I wonder how that's exactly it was. Yeah. I wonder how this thing's going to develop when we do go back to whatever the world was before or something like how that would change. But we're not going to talk about the Mountain Valley Pipeline because I know the ATC regards that as questions asked and answered. And frankly, I think framing that story perhaps in the light of other pipelines, talk about pipeline issues that you address and how you address those pipelines. Because I know there are plenty of pipelines on or under the trail, aren't there? Yeah.
So I don't remember everything that everyone who's come on has spoken about. So I don't want to retread, already tread ground.
Of course, yeah.
But essentially, Mountain Valley and other pipelines have informed for ATC how we approach this proposed development. We, other people, regional directors, regional staff are better people to talk about the process for when there's an application for a pipeline and working with the Forest Service or working with the Park Service on it. So a lot of what I do in the pipeline space is more quote, end quote, political. And it is about changing overall policy rather than working within the policy that we have now to process a particular application for a pipeline. So there are two pieces of legislation that ATC has worked on in the past year or so that are sort of specific to scenic trails. And one of them, the Scenic Trail Viewshed Protection Act, which is a bill that Annie Custer of New Hampshire is leading, and we have several other trail representatives who are original co-sponsors, It was introduced in the last Congress. It hasn't been reintroduced into this Congress yet. But I think that's a great example of how ATC feels about pipelines, because it is the legislative version of ATC's Stewardship Council and board approved natural gas or methane pipeline policy. That
Sure.
It's how we think this process should play out, and the weighing of factors and costs and benefits in the issuing of what's called a certificate of public convenience and necessity, which is the big legal document you need to build a pipeline.
Uh-huh.
So what do we do on pipeline policy? We believe that there should be a hard look at what the current state of the market is and what the demand is before we agree to build any more pipelines. And we also think that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is the independent federal agency that processes pipeline applications and gives you permission to build an interstate pipeline, natural gas or methane pipeline, should take a regional view in looking at the market and not a project by project view, which is how FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, evaluates pipeline permit applications now.
Okay.
They don't say, okay, we're going to look at this energy market, and this is the amount of consumption, this is how much it costs given the amount of consumption and the current supply. So we need X number of pipelines, or we need X amount more natural gas flowing into the wholesale market to meet this demand. Basically, a developer comes to them with an application. They look at it in complete isolation. And as long as it checks off all their boxes, they say, okay, you can build this pipeline. Here's your certificate of public convenience and necessity. Go into state or federal courts and get writs so that you can seize private property via eminent domain,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. So FERC looks at things in isolation. And we believe that FERC should look at a greater totality of circumstances. And that's one of the things that the Scenic Trail Viewshed Protection Act does. It's something that the Pipeline Fairness and Transparency Act, that is in the last Congress, Mr. Griffith of Virginia's. And there is a bill with a longer title that's very similar to that Senators Warner and Kane put out in the last Congress that we worked with them on.
So hang on. So these are things that have been put out in the last Congress, but they died in the Senate, as things tend to do, I presume.
Well,
so are they going to reissue the same bill and try to pass it through this Senate, or is that the plan?
So none of these bills got hearings or moved. So they didn't die in the Senate. They just didn't move. The House. Okay. You can only die in the Senate if the House passes the bill in the Senate.
Yes. So they didn't get passed in the House, right?
We've talked about reintroducing these bills, but we don't have a projected reintroduction date as of right now. So,
okay.
And ultimately, as I like to point out to people I work with from time to time, members of Congress introduce bills. Nonprofit organizations don't introduce bills. We help congressional offices write legislation.
Okay, so having a seat at the table, or in this case, a seat in front of your computer, is really vital for the interests of the ATC, and which means the AT itself. Well, look, that was a little bit more in the weeds than my pea brain can cope with. But I appreciate you saying it, and I think it's worthwhile to have talked about it in that way, because there has been a lot of crap spoken about what's going on at the moment. And I think having somebody who's involved in the day-to-day work of advocating on behalf of the AT and the ATC to government is obviously vital, and it's useful for people to know that somebody who was a lobbyist is able to do that and represent the ATC as well as they can. So I appreciate you coming on and telling us all about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Sounds good.
Take it easy.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Such an articulate bloke, wasn't he? Mind you, I suppose being a lobbyist makes that a bit of a prerequisite, doesn't it? We actually spoke quite a bit longer, though more about Washington and politics than hiking. So I trimmed the audio back to hiking. Very interesting guy, and I'm glad we had that sort of representation. Well, I wondered if you'd all suddenly abandoned the show when I announced that I'd be stepping back a bit from April until October. So I am delighted to be able to thank monthly donors Lisa Rana, Brian Helton Jr. and Erskine Bass, along with a one-off donation from Jens Lipperheider. And I think I'm right. I think Jens donated once before as well. So thanks to all of you. And remember, this is to everybody. These shows take time and money to put on. So I'd encourage you all to hit the donate button on hikingradionetwork.com. Make a donation to ensure that the shows continue. Thanks again. Now, Katie. And I was getting a little worried that I wouldn't hear from her, yet she texted me as she was climbing Sassafras Mountain, and we agreed to speak when she'd gotten to the top of Sassafras, which she duly did around 20 minutes later. Here's Katie, or Phoenix. Okay, we're on with Katie. Firstly, how are you, Katie?
I'm doing great, Steve. Oh my God, it's beautiful out here. I don't know how I got so lucky to have sunny days on the first week in Georgia.
Yeah, there is that. So you're having fun, and when did you actually start? Was it Monday morning?
On Monday morning, I started the approach trail, and then came out at the Springer Mountain parking lot.
Right.
So I started under the arches, and it was really neat. The stairs, those are something.
You didn't have to do that, don't you?
Well, I'm glad I did it.
Right. So you got to the top. How were you feeling that morning? Because I've seen your video, and there's not a lot of talking. So how were you feeling at that moment as you went under the arch?
So as soon as my cousin Nancy picked me up at the train station in Gainesville and dropped me off. But
Sure.
as we pulled into Amicalola, I told her, I said, I think I'm going to throw up. I didn't get teary-eyed or hyper or anything, but I did feel nauseous.
Really? Isn't that funny? It's something you've looked forward to. It doesn't matter how old we are, you and I are in our 60s. Doesn't matter how that is. It doesn't matter about all the experience you've had when you're faced with the reality of walking 2,000 miles. It's quite scary, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is daunting, but I think the thing is to get out and just appreciate every day, because it is gorgeous here. It's still in the late winter stages. You can see the trees, but just a breeze and sunny. So I couldn't hope for better hiking weather.
All right. Have you had any rain yet?
None.
Wow.
It's coming next week.
Yeah.
Though.
Don't worry about that. You're going to get it.
Yeah.
So you got to the top of Springer, and I saw your picture by the sign, and that's exciting itself, isn't it? So was that the end of your day, or did you stay at the shelter just down from there?
So no, I have at Springer. So it was really neat because all the hikers were just so bubbly and enthusiastic. It was like mountain of hope was what I think of it. And so then I went down to, I hiked out of Springer Mountain and went down to the parking area. So I've been lucky enough. So for the first 4 days, I'm sleeping in a bed. So
oh my
I'm
gosh.
one of the lucky ones. I know. But what do you do when you have an awesome cousin who's like, yeah, stay here?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the first few days I carried mostly a full pack, but today I just dumped a bunch of stuff off at her house. I'm hiking 10.5 miles today out to Woody Gap.
All right.
So, but my body feels good.
Really?
I feel pretty good. And I think it's because I've had the opportunity to get a good night's sleep every night. And then, especially today, the first day was a climb up Sassafras Mountain, and to go with a lighter pack,
Yes,
So,
yes, it helps. Some people frown upon slack packing, but to me, it's all you need to do is take what you need to have that day, and you don't need to carry your tent with you today. So that's fine. Right. No problem at all.
You know what? They can meet me on Katahdin and tell me that, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Good luck with that. Yeah. So you got up there, you had the climbs, and you get off. So when do you expect to have your first night sleeping in the woods?
Probably just after Neil Gap.
Right.
Let me see. I'm looking at the map. I think it's Low Gap Shelter,
Right.
somewhere around there. Yeah.
So what do you think of the shelters? The shelters are something to behold, aren't they?
Yeah, some of them are really nice.
Well, nice-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, nice-ish. Yeah, but I'll be tent camping. I mean, they're encouraging people to tent camp
Of course they are.
just because of COVID, and so that's my plan. I like my little tent. And,
Are there a lot of people around? A lot of people around?
Not a ton. There were a lot the first day on Springer Mountain. I saw quite a few, but
Sure.
there's a lot of different people starting out, and some of them, oh my gosh, like I shuttled with one woman who had a 50-pound backpack, and
Wow.
and they were leaving to go into town to shed some of their gear.
Oh, really?
And I just can't imagine carrying that much. And so, but mostly I'm kind of on my own. There's, I see people now and then, and we say hi. And
Are you enjoying that, being by yourself?
oh, love it. Yes, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Really?
So,
Katie, just remember I said this to you. You will eventually drive yourself crazy. So enjoy it while you can.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, it's just lovely to have a little bit of solitude. And
Sure.
and of course, I don't really feel that I have a lot of solitude, but for a few hours in the day, it's nice and, peaceful. And so that's kind of where I am right now in my hike.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased you're enjoying it. Because some people do go on that trail and literally in the approach trail, they think this is absolutely not for me. So, is it much as you expected it would be, or is it have certain things been a surprise for you?
I can tell you that I was pleasantly surprised that the approach trail didn't just do me in.
Right.
I mean,
right.
And I think part of it was my pack was only 20 pounds
Right.
that I was
helps.
carrying on the,
Yeah.
and my full pack is 23 pounds. So I feel like that makes a lot of difference. And also, accepting the help that you can get.
Absolutely. Every time.
And,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are at this point are even getting off the trail, So
I'm sure they are. It happens all the time.
But I feel really strong. I feel really good,
Good
and
stuff.
I'm trying to be aware, not to mess myself up, to make
Yes.
sure that when the time comes, I take that 0 day and just let everything, rest.
Well, a 10 mile. So you did a 10 mile. You're doing a 10 mile today, even though you've got a smaller pack. That's probably okay. But don't go
Right.
Don't go too fast. People,
Right.
the biggest mistake people make is trying to get to Neil Gap in a day or 2 days. It's just not worth doing.
Lord,
because
no.
tomorrow you're probably going to be doing Blood Mountain, or the day after.
I'm tomorrow. So let's see. Tomorrow I'm taking a short day, and I'm going to hang out with my cousin and
Right.
wash some clothes
Sure.
and go
Yes.
do a
Yeah.
resupply. I've been eating my lunches and stuff.
But you've already worked out that you do need to wash your clothes as much as you possibly. Whenever you get the chance, you should be doing it.
I haven't done that, and she hasn't said anything.
All right, that's good to know.
you know.
Okay, well, look, it's lovely.
Smell myself yet.
Well, it's lovely to hear you sounding well and happy. I think when we speak to you next week, we'll have more of an idea how you really started, because you will have been in the woods. So
Yeah.
if you've got another 7
That's
days,
right.
got another 7 days, and this is Wednesday, and I'm glad that you were able to call in. You're up a mountain now, you say?
I'm up on Sassafras Mountain.
Yeah,
and
up
I'm
on
heading
Sassafras.
to Woody Gap.
Okay, cool. All right then. Well, look, have a great rest of the day, and we'll speak
All
next
right.
week. All right.
Excellent, Steve. Thanks.
Cheers, then.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Nice start, eh? Only good weather, no rain, and so far, having a ball. Having 4 straight nights in a comfy bed is avoiding the first smack around the head of camping in a forest, but As I say, take it where you can find it. This hike can't be all misery. You have to manage your days the very best you can. Katie has a good friend nearby who's willing to help her through these early days. Let's hope she's still having a blast when we hear from her next week. Finally today, Larry Luxembourg goes into the cult of a single personality. Sounds quite familiar, doesn't it? I'll see you next week. The Travelling Garveys, admiring disciples of the 80s grand old man. Afoot and light-hearted, I take to the open road, healthy, free, and the world before me, the long brown path leading wherever I choose. Henceforth I art not good fortune, I myself am good fortune. Henceforth I whimper no more, postpone no more, I need nothing. I'm done with indoor complaints, libraries, and querulous criticisms. Strong and content I travel the open road. Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, inscribed on a statue at Bear Mountain Zoo along the AT. Backpackers tend to be ascetic and stoic. They shrug off pain and do not lust after creature comforts. Occasional company is tolerable, even desirable, but more than that and they can feel closed in, trapped. Ed Garvey, an early thru hiker, is a notable exception. He's one of the most gregarious people ever to hike the AT. During his 1970 thru hike, people continually met him with food, drink and various festivities. Garvey's hike was less of a lone adventure than a roving party. Travelling Garveys, a trail family of devoted yet unworthy followers of the most noble thru-hiking guru, Ed Garvey, who had friends meet him at road crossings with rides, food and, especially, good spirits during his groundbreaking 1970 hike from Georgia to Maine. It is toward the pursuit of these good spirits that all dedicated Ed heads are committed. Founded in 1992 on a northbound thru hike by Sprained Rice and Medicine Man, the group includes, in order of induction, Fairhope, Andy Bliss, Trickster, Phantom Engineer, Pink Cloud, Tawanda, and Orion. Honorary members include Gene Cashin and the Guru himself. The group's official motto is, "We are not worthy." Bill O'Brien, a two-time 2,000-miler, acquired his trail name Sprained Rice in two parts. As a young Boy Scout, he attended a banquet where Rice O'Brien was served, hence the nickname Rice. After a bad fall on Maine on his first thru hike, another hiker saw him limping along and changed it to Sprained Rice. Bill is in many ways an embodiment of Ed's hiking spirit. Fun-loving and outgoing, Bill seems to know everybody on the trail and everything that's happening. Bill is very much a contact person, said his partner, Andrew Medicine Man Sam. Everybody he meets, he remembers their name. If they see him at trail days, he can tell them, "Well, I met you at such and such shelter or gap." He can tell them their trail name, their real name. It's amazing the memory he's got. The thing that keeps me coming back is meeting people out on the trail, said Bill. It's such an intense experience. You like to think that you're on your own, but you're really not. You come to rely on contact with other people, even if it's only for 5 minutes on the side of the trail when the other person's going the opposite way. You're deprived of normal human contact, so when you do have human contact, it means so much more. It's the old deprivation story where you don't miss something until you don't have it. And that's why I think on the trail most people bond closely together. It's because you're in an isolation chamber. When you run across a fellow inmate, there's going to be a special bond. So to see these people again in the real world, it's always nice. It reminds you of the simpler life you led on the trail. When Bill and Andrew were planning the 1992 thru hike, they found that because they wanted to visit so many friends, they were going to have more than 30 mile drops, many of them at people's homes. Other thru hikers might average a dozen mile drops. Bill and Andrew realised they would be partying with so many people along the way that the hike was taken on a Garvey-esque quality. Early in the hike, Andrew developed the idea of a Garvey-approved stamp in a circle modelled after the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. It would be used for things like shelters that would meet with Garvey's approval. Gradually, the idea evolved into the Travelling Garveys, a group of people committed to emulating Ed's hiking spirit. New members generally were sworn in and given a copy of Ed's book, although at the first induction for Lawrence Fairhope Macduff, they had to make do with a copy of a bird book. Bill and Andrew took the name the Travelling Garveys, partly as a gag, but mostly to honour the influential legend. No one has been more tickled by the Travelling Garveys than Ed himself, who seems to have found the attention flattering. In March 1992, Andrew and Bill rode to Springer with two friends from Bill's previous through hike, Longlegs and Crackerjack. Bill and Andrew started talking about the different meetings and mail drops they set up along the way. Bill said, "That's just what Ed Garvey did. He had people meeting him all along the way. We're the Travelling Garveys." It kind of stuck in our minds, Andrew said. Then, in about the third or fourth shelter, we were signing the register, and for some reason I got this good housekeeping symbol in my mind. I thought I'd just write Garvey approved, like the good housekeeping seal of approval. I'd write Garvey approved, then I'd circle it and put copyright 1992 on it. I did that in about 2 registers and kept on doing it without having any idea that it would snowball into what it did. Eventually, people started catching us and asking, what is Garvey approved? We had Garvey approved shelters, Garvey approved toilets. The funniest thing that happened was they started doing spin-offs. 2 guys hiking behind us started calling themselves the Gravies, and another guy, the Phantom Engineer, started approving bridges and buildings. If he liked it, if it was constructed well, he'd write Phantom approved. Garvey approved, an acknowledgement of anyone or anything that facilitates a through hike. The Apple Valley Inn, Glenwood, New Jersey, is surely Garvey approved. Andrew's wife, Laura Sam, witnessed the induction of the first new member, Fairhope, in Atkins, Virginia. Andrew and Bill wrote up this oath that you'd have to take to be a Garvey and wrote out a certificate that was signed by the 2 of them to make it all official. Fairhope had to put his hand on an Eastern bird book, pretend it was Ed Garvey's book, and take this oath to be a Garvey. Later, Laura said, 2 women applied to be Garveys. Andrew and Bill had met the 2 women hikers at trail days, and they kept asking, "What is this Garvey stuff?" Farther north, Andrew and Bill received a letter in the mail, a sort of resume listing the good things they'd done and the places they'd been picked up by somebody, fed and treated like a Garvey. The letter said they wanted to be Garvey approved and enter the club. They were inducted at the 1992 Alder Gathering in Hanover, New Hampshire. Garveyism, a style of hiking on the Appalachian Trail in which support personnel or trail angels are lined up in advance. Pre-planned trail magic. Named for trail guru Edward B. Garvey, born 1914, of Virginia, who had friends meet him at every road crossing with transportation, food and spirits during his groundbreaking 1970 through hike. Few people have had a more profound influence on the trail than Ed Garvey. His book about his 1970 hike, Appalachian Hiker, Adventure of a Lifetime, has been ubiquitous among through hikers ever since its publication. The mileage fact sheet included in the book was the forerunner of many publications that would address through hikers' practical needs. The first account by a through hiker to gain wide circulation, it introduced many prospective hikers to the trail. The hike itself, part of a surge of interest in backpacking and the outdoors, brought increased publicity to the trail. It also made Ed a celebrity in the AT community. At trail days and ATC meetings, people mob Ed like a rock star. They continually approach him to say how much his book meant to them, or just to meet him. And he clearly enjoys being such a positive influence on so many people. The trail has been a major part of Ed's life since the early 50s. An Eagle Scout, he learned of the trail through the Boy Scouts, joined PATC in 1953, and 6 years later became supervisor of trails. He proudly describes a program he developed to repair and maintain the 18 shelters that were the PATC's responsibility. In the 60s, he joined the ATC board and soon became secretary. He spearheaded a drive to beef up ATC membership, which soon tripled. He also has effectively lobbied the federal government for AT funding and passage of the National Scenic Trails Act. Ed has stayed close to the trail, continuing to hike, even doing 3/4 of the trail in 1990 at age 76. In late 1992, he had bypass surgery, but by the next summer, he was again hiking at a pace that would exhaust many younger people. Garvey, Garvid, the act of Garveying, as in, we Garvid as soon as we hit the first road. If we don't Garvey through Connecticut, we are not worthy. Profile: Laura and Andrew, Medicine Man, Sam. It's not easy for a couple of any age when one is an avid hiker and the other doesn't hike at all. Andrew, Medicine Man Sam, 30, dreamed of a through hike. Laura, a high school teacher and producer of high school musicals, would be staying behind at home in North Carolina. They had some difficult times, but both ended up happy with the trip. Andrew, medicine man Sam, had wanted to do a through hike for years. As often happens, a tragedy gave him a special impetus. A registered nurse, Andrew worked with his best friend and frequent hiking companion, Mike Ward, in the intensive care unit at the University of North Carolina Hospital. One day in 1991, Mike complained of a pain in his lung. Andrew joked that the worst thing it could be was a pulmonary embolism. The next day, Mike was dead of the very thing they joked about. Mike and Andrew had been inseparable, and Andrew was distraught. He realised that he should do a through hike while he had the chance. When Mike died so suddenly, it was really hard, and it left such an empty place in Andrew's life, Andrew's wife Laura said. When he started talking about doing the trail, I thought it would be great. People were amazed. You mean you let him do that? Let is not a word in our marriage. We support each other doing what we need to do. I've always been independent, so I wasn't afraid to be by myself. I only asked him for 2 promises, to write in his journal every day, and I'd write in my journal, and to please not stand on the edge of ledges. He kept his first promise. He did not keep his second promise. He'd send film back to be developed, and I'd look through the pictures to see where he'd been and be all excited. Then it would be, oh God, he's on a ledge. The hardest thing about being at home was that I'd look forward to his phone calls, and I'd get home and there'd be a message on the answering machine from 10 minutes earlier, and I knew I wasn't going to get another phone call for a week. It would drive me crazy. At the beginning, I'd get upset about it and cry. Toward the end, the last 6 weeks, I didn't see him at all, but I was okay by then. Laura met Andrew several times along the trail. First at trail days, then for a week in Virginia during spring break. It was supposed to be another 2 months before she saw him in Connecticut at the home of his partner, Bill Sprained Rice O'Brien. Bill suggested instead that Andrew surprise Laura on their anniversary in June. The day started out a miserable one for Laura. I spent 3.5 hours in the dentist's office. I was getting a crown and it wasn't working out well. I'd had enough, and when I got home there was no anniversary card in the mailbox. A friend who knew that Andrew was coming had said, "Come over to my house for a cookout that night. I don't want you to sit in your house by yourself." I told her I was fine, but she'd insisted, so I said, "All right, I'll come over." The phone was ringing as I came in the door and my whole face hurt. I felt awful. It was my friend saying, "Aren't you coming over?" I told her I felt awful. I said, "I'll sit down for a while and if I feel better, I'll come over." I got outside and let the sun hit my face. I thought, these people are trying to be nice. You're being rude. Take some aspirin and go over there. I looked like hell because I'd been crying at the dentist. I didn't change my clothes, didn't put on any makeup, didn't comb my hair. I went over to the house and there was Andrew. It was the best surprise of my life. She added, "I told Andrew he's going to have a hard time topping that anniversary present. What's he going to do this year?" Laura had difficulty adjusting after Andrew completed the trail. It took me about 3 months to adjust to Andrew being back home because I had everything in the house organised the way I wanted it. He came home and started messing up cabinets. Gradually, I got used to him being there again. Laura found that after Andrew's return, he was more relaxed and spontaneous. He claimed his work in the critical care unit had demanded that he be structured. After the trail, she said, he was a lot more open to making friends, a lot more social, less reserved. Andrew, who returned to work 2 weeks after finishing the trail, felt he entered the rat race too soon. But the trail is still in him. He has visited Bill at trail days, which has made him realise how special that partnership was. It made me realise how much I miss being with Bill on the trail, he said. We hiked from Springer all the way to Maine. It was kind of unlikely. People split up on the trip. I don't think I realised as much as Bill did how much of a bond there was. We did have some separation anxiety at the end. The trail, Andrew said, renewed my faith in people in general. I don't judge people by their appearance as I used to. People with long beards, long scraggly hair, rough clothes, they were people to stay away from. But I saw so many people, including myself, with long beards and long hair, I'd look in the mirror and say, "Oh wow."